For decades, Hollywood fans have wondered about the truth behind one of the industry's most unexpected pairings: the warm, graceful, and universally admired Sophia Loren, and the intense, sharp-edged, often unpredictable George Peppard. Their paths crossed at a time when both stars were navigating fame, pressure, and the hidden conflicts that defined the golden age of cinema. But what really happened between them? And why has Sophia Loren, always poised, always diplomatic, stayed silent about George Peppard for so many years? Now, at 91 years old, she has finally broken that silence, revealing memories she kept tucked away for over half a century. And what she shares isn't just a story about two actors working together. It's a story about ego, struggle, respect, tension, and a side of George Peppard that the world rarely got to see. Peppard, best known for his cool charm and troubled reputation behind the scenes, was a man who made powerful friends and even more powerful enemies. But according to Sophia Loren, the truth about him is far more complicated than the headlines ever suggested. She speaks of their first meeting, the surprising clash of personalities, the private moments no one knew about, and the quiet bond that formed in the shadows of a turbulent industry. Some of what she reveals is touching, some of it is shocking, and some of it changes everything we thought we knew about George Peppard. This is the story Sophia Loren never intended to share until now. Long before Sophia Loren ever spoke publicly about George Peppard, their connection began in a way neither of them expected. It was the late era of classic Hollywood, a time when producers still held enormous power and when stars were often matched together, not because they chose each other, but because the studio believed their chemistry would sell. Sophia, already an international icon, was accustomed to meeting strong personalities. But even she wasn't prepared for the first moment she locked eyes with George Peppard. Peppard had a reputation that followed him everywhere. To some, he was brilliant, a disciplined actor with sharp instincts and an undeniable presence. To others, he was difficult, demanding, and capable of turning the calmest set into a storm. When Sophia arrived on the project, she had already been warned. "He doesn't bend," one executive told her privately. "He expects everyone else to bend first." But Sophia, known for her patience and elegance, simply smiled. She had worked with every type of personality imaginable. George Peppard, she believed, would be just another challenge. Their first meeting took place in a quiet rehearsal room. Sophia remembered walking in to find Peppard alone, studying the script with a seriousness that felt almost intimidating. When he looked up, his eyes held a mix of curiosity and calculation, as though he was trying to decide who she really was behind the global fame. Sophia extended a warm greeting, and according to her, the moment was unexpectedly tense. Peppard responded politely, but his tone was cool, almost distant, as if he wasn't sure whether to trust her or keep his guard up. But something shifted during that first exchange. Instead of clashing, they surprised each other. George, who was used to co-stars pushing back against his intensity, found that Sophia wasn't intimidated by his sharpness. She listened, smiled, and kept her composure. Sophia, in turn, noticed something unusual in Peppard. Beneath the strict discipline and hardened exterior, she sensed a man who had built emotional walls long before she ever met him. He was guarded, yes, but she could tell he wasn't unkind. Their early rehearsals were a study in contrasts. Sophia approached each scene with warmth and fluidity, letting emotions guide her choices. Peppard approached it like a chess match, calculating every movement, every breath, every shift in tone. At first, their styles seemed entirely incompatible. Crew members whispered that the pairing would likely explode within days. But privately, Sophia saw something different, a spark of potential, a chance to build a dynamic that neither of them had experienced before. Over time, small moments began to break the ice. Sophia later admitted that George showed flashes of dry humor when he relaxed, often surprising her with remarks that revealed a softer, more human side. There were also moments when he quietly supported her, defending her interpretation of a scene when others questioned it. These glimpses, rare but genuine, made Sophia realize that Peppard's intensity wasn't arrogance. It was insecurity hidden beneath a polished exterior. Still, friction was unavoidable. George had a habit of challenging everything, from script changes to camera setups. He pushed the director, questioned decisions, and sometimes walked off to cool down. Sophia, however, never reacted in anger. She remained centered, letting his storms pass, and returning with calm. She later revealed that this patience wasn't just professionalism. It was her way of understanding him. He wanted perfection, she said. But perfection was a shield. By the end of the first week, something unexpected happened. George Peppard, the man who rarely praised anyone, approached Sophia privately and thanked her for her composure. It was a small gesture, but for Sophia, it marked a turning point. It was the first sign that he respected her, not just as a co-star, but as a person, and according to Sophia Loren, that moment was the beginning of everything she would eventually reveal. As filming continued, Sophia Loren began noticing behaviors from George Peppard that were far more complex than the public ever knew. While the world saw him as confident, sharp-tongued, and sometimes uncooperative, Sophia witnessed the quieter moments that told a different story. This was the chapter of George's life that few people ever talked about, the side she finally revealed at 91. Their working relationship shifted dramatically after the first week. Sophia had earned his respect, which was no easy feat, but with that respect came a level of honesty he rarely showed others. George began arriving earlier to set, often pacing the hallway outside the studio before anyone else was awake. Sophia once found him sitting alone, script in hand, reading through the same lines repeatedly. He didn't hear her approach. When he finally looked up, she saw something startling: exhaustion in his eyes. Not physical, but emotional. Sophia later said, George was fighting battles nobody could see, and she meant it. He carried a weight that didn't match the polished, controlled persona he showed the world. When cameras rolled, he was disciplined, sharp, and fully in character. But the moment they yelled cut, he sometimes drifted into silence, staring at the ground as if something deep inside him refused to let go. Sophia tried to approach these moments gently. She would ask if he was all right, and he would usually shrug it off, insisting he was fine. But she knew better. Experience had taught her that people who build walls often do so to hide their wounds. Behind the scenes, George struggled intensely with perfectionism. Every mistake felt personal. If a scene didn't go the way he wanted, even if the director approved it, he would push for another take. Sophia noticed that he wasn't trying to outshine anyone. He was fighting himself. Each scene became a test he believed he had to pass, not for the audience, but to prove something to his own self-worth. Some days were more difficult than others. The crew whispered about his mood swings, calling him unpredictable. But Sophia never saw him as unpredictable. She saw consistency in his inconsistency, a pattern shaped by pressure he had carried for years. Whenever he lashed out or grew frustrated, she didn't react with anger. Instead, she gave him space, knowing it wasn't directed at her. One day, during a particularly emotional scene, George froze. The cameras were rolling, the lights were blazing, and the room was silent, but he couldn't deliver his line. He clenched his jaw, closed his eyes, and stepped back from the set. The director waited, expecting an explosion, but what happened instead shocked everyone. George quietly said, "Give me a moment," and walked out. Sophia followed him a few minutes later. She found him sitting on a bench outside, staring into the distance. For the first time, he looked vulnerable, not angry, not difficult, just human. She sat beside him without speaking. After a long silence, he finally said, "I don't know why it's so hard sometimes." That admission, simple as it was, changed the way Sophia understood him forever. From that day forward, their connection deepened. George began trusting her more, asking her opinion between takes, leaning on her instincts, and even confiding in her about small frustrations that he normally kept bottled up. Sophia later revealed that these were the moments when she realized George wasn't the isolated, abrasive man people assumed. He was someone who longed to be understood, but didn't know how to show it. Other cast members were stunned at how smoothly George worked with Sophia. It wasn't that he changed, it was that she had figured out the rhythm of his personality. When he needed space, she gave it. When he needed grounding, she provided it. When he needed someone to challenge him respectfully, she did exactly that. But even as they grew closer, whispers around the studio grew louder. Some people couldn't understand why George placed so much trust in her. Others believed their chemistry was becoming too intense, too real. Rumors began circulating about tension, jealousy, and emotional sparks behind closed doors. Sophia ignored the rumors, but she never forgot them, because the truth behind those whispers would soon reveal something neither she nor George could have predicted. As production reached its halfway point, tension around the set became impossible to ignore. Crew members whispered that George Peppard was becoming more withdrawn, while others believed he was struggling to hold himself together. But only Sophia Loren knew the full truth, because she had witnessed the subtle signs long before anyone else. George had always carried himself with a quiet intensity, the kind that made people admire him from a distance, but fear getting too close. Yet beneath that hardened surface, Sophia sensed a softness he rarely allowed anyone to see. She could tell when he was bothered by something, even when he tried to pretend everything was fine. His shoulders would stiffen, his voice would lower, and his eyes would darken, as if he were bracing himself for an invisible blow. One afternoon, everything came to a breaking point. They were filming a scene that required deep emotional vulnerability from George. The lighting had been set perfectly, the crew was silent, and the director gave the signal to begin. George stepped into position, took a breath, and began delivering his lines. But halfway through, his voice wavered, just slightly, but enough for Sophia to notice. The director called cut, assuming it was a minor slip, but George didn't reset. He stood frozen in place, staring at the floor. When Sophia approached him softly and said his name, he didn't react. It was as if the world had paused around him. Finally, he muttered, "I can't do this." It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was something deeper, something that sounded painfully close to defeat. The director attempted to lighten the moment, but George shook his head, stepped away from the lights, and walked off the set. Everyone around them exchanged uneasy glances. They had never seen him collapse like that, not even in his most difficult moments. Sophia followed him once more, knowing instinctively that this wasn't something to ignore. She found him in a quiet corner behind the sound stage, sitting on a wooden crate, his elbows resting on his knees. He didn't notice when she arrived. His hands were trembling. Sophia sat beside him slowly. "Talk to me," she whispered. George exhaled, the breath shaky and uneven. "I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. "Everyone expects me to be unbreakable, and I'm so tired of pretending." It was the most honest sentence Sophia had ever heard from him. She looked at him, really looked at him, and realized in that moment that George wasn't dealing with simple stress or frustration. He was carrying years of pressure, years of criticism, years of expectations that had hardened him on the outside, but shattered something delicate inside. People had always mistaken his intensity for arrogance. Few understood that it was a shield built out of survival. Sophia reached out and placed a hand over his. "You don't have to be unbreakable," she said softly. "Not with me." For the first time, George didn't pull away. He didn't force a smile or change the subject. He simply let himself exist, fragile, exhausted, human. A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable, just real. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "You're the only one who sees past all of it." Sophia didn't respond. She didn't need to. He already knew. From that moment, something between them shifted. Their connection deepened beyond professional respect. Sophia became his anchor, the one person he trusted to steady him when he faltered, the one who understood the weight he carried without judgment. But with that closeness came complications neither of them expected. Rumors quickly spread across the studio. Some claimed George was becoming too dependent on Sophia. Others whispered that their emotional bond was overshadowing the production. A few even suggested that Sophia was overstepping, unaware of the silent war George was fighting with himself. The tension grew until one particular event forced everything out into the open, the kind of moment that exposed hidden truths and left both Sophia and George facing a reality neither could ignore. And this moment would forever shape the way Sophia spoke about him decades later. As filming neared its final weeks, the uneasy balance between Sophia Loren and George Peppard could no longer be contained. Their quiet understanding had become the backbone of George's stability. But it also became the subject of relentless speculation. Some crew members watched with sympathy, others with suspicion, and a few stirred the rumors deliberately, convinced that something unspoken was unfolding behind the scenes. The pressure finally reached its peak during a late-night shoot that had been rescheduled multiple times because George simply couldn't get through one particular sequence. He wasn't angry, but he was tense, painfully so, and everyone could feel the weight of it pressing down on the entire production. The director pulled George aside, his patience thinning. "We can't keep delaying," he said bluntly. "Whatever is going on, sort it out." George said nothing. He looked exhausted, as if he hadn't slept in days. Sophia stepped in gently, trying to diffuse the rising frustration. "Let me talk to him," she offered. The director nodded and walked away. Relief and worry mixed in his expression. Sophia found George alone on a narrow balcony just outside the soundstage, staring at the empty lot below. His posture was tight, his breaths uneven. "What's happening?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn around. "They think I'm a problem," he muttered. "They think I'm dragging this whole production down." Sophia walked closer, her voice steady. "They don't understand you, and they don't need to. You only have to get through this moment." George shook his head. "I can't keep asking you to pull me back together." "You're not asking," she replied. "You're surviving." That sentence broke the last barrier between them. George finally faced her, and for the first time, he let the truth slip out without restraint. "I'm losing myself," he said, "and you're the only one who notices before I fall." Sophia felt a sharp ache in her chest. She had known he was struggling, but not to this extent. The seriousness in his eyes told her this wasn't a temporary crisis. It was a culmination of years he had spent battling inner storms alone. Just then, a studio executive stepped onto the balcony. He cleared his throat loudly, clearly uncomfortable, interrupting their private moment. "Sophia," he said formally, "could we speak with you for a moment?" George stiffened instantly, as if bracing for bad news. Sophia followed the executive back inside, where the director and the producers were waiting. Their expressions were tense. One of the producers spoke first. "We've been observing the situation. George's performance is uneven, and the delays are costing us time we don't have." Sophia remained silent, anticipating the next part. The director sighed. "We believe he's depending on you too much, Sophia. It's putting strain on the production. We need you to keep some distance." The words hit Sophia like a cold wind. Distance, when George was barely holding himself together, when she might be the only person keeping him anchored. She answered calmly but firmly. "He is not a burden. He is a human being doing his best under immense pressure." The room fell silent, but the producers insisted. "If you continue supporting him this closely, he will rely on you instead of fixing his own issues, and that isn't good for either of you." Sophia left the room with a heavy heart. She understood the studio's concerns, but she also knew they had no idea just how fragile George truly was beneath his hardened exterior. When she returned to the balcony, George immediately sensed something had changed. "They blamed me, didn't they?" he asked quietly. Sophia didn't answer. Her silence said everything. George looked away, ashamed and defeated. "I never wanted to drag you into my chaos." "You didn't," she replied. "But they don't understand what you're fighting." His jaw tightened. "And I can't let you pay the price for it." That night marked a turning point, the moment when their bond shifted from a steady support to something neither of them could safely hold onto anymore. It was the moment that pushed George to make a decision that stunned everyone on set, and it was the moment Sophia Loren would remember decades later, when she finally spoke about the truth no one else ever knew.